rejoicing.
Chores done, time to play the game. There has to be something to do, right? Hmm. I love video games. I love playing them and I'm fascinated by the process of their creation. You could say that I am a game-passionate nerd. This is why I find game design in Gachas that I know, and by extension Wuthering waves, exceptionally bad. But I also believe that it can and should be much better. I spent about 2 months at this point trying to research and write on how exactly could it happen and why it should. And in this video I want to present it to you. In order to understand my point, however, I first need to explain at you some of the game design basics that I learned. The definition of a game on the screen that I'll break down shortly tries to be the most practical one and is very concise, though the book admits there are still exceptions. Games are, after all, an ever-evolving, deep and subjective medium. My breakdown goes: in order for a digital medium to be considered a video game, the main way to experience it has to be through gameplay. A gameplay happens when a player interacts with the game in a manner which the game explicitly allows. These interactions serve the purpose of overcoming a challenge and achieving a goal set by the game, and a success in doing so results in a reward. Finally, what's most important is the process needs to be fun. Otherwise, one could call doing chores like washing dishes a game, which it isn't. But you may ask, isn't fun too subjective? And in search for an answer, I inquired another book. Theory of Fun for Game Design by Ralph Koster postulates that people have fun when they learn relevant skills, and games teach them in interesting ways. However, the book's first edition was printed in 2004, and we have much more data now in 2025, especially from live service games and mobile products. I would say that the book's postulate is correct, but it tunnel visions on the learning too much. My theory is, games are fun when they reward players with a feeling of affirmable progress. It just so happens that personal development is the most genuine and impactful feeling of progress a person can experience, and affirmation of it can be found in real life, hence the book's heavy focus on learning. This would explain the emergence of games which only experience is seeing number go higher with no real effort. They provide the most artificial feeling of progress and affirmation, but provide them nonetheless, and cheaply at that. A perfect bait for audiences who lack experience in consuming such media, like for example children or people too busy to learn or care. The subjective part of fun remains. Since each of us is different, we prioritize different feelings of progress and affirmation. Personal or cognitive development by broadening our viewpoints by the realistic, well-presented story with believable characters, building resilience from overcoming difficult gameplay challenges, mastering teamwork and social skills from multiplayer experiences, etc. Or simply in-game progression. by unlocking new areas of the game, acquiring more powerful items for player character, unlocking more diverse ways to experience the game, etc. Obviously, there is also an artistic part of the game, such as graphics, music and story presentation, but I will focus on the gameplay, as this is the only aspect I researched, and I dare say WuWa does not lack artistry. Let's now explore what games are not. Without gameplay, there isn't a video game. A medium lacking just one of aforementioned characteristics is no longer a game. When a person performs very simple actions without a challenge and claims rewards, it's not gameplay, it's claiming a gift, like clicking a button and receiving login bonuses. This action is quite literally just ticking off a checkbox, and not gameplay. When person overcomes a self-imposed challenge, attains a self-set goal, and the game does not award them for it, it is not gameplay, it's a sandbox experience, like building yourself a base in Minecraft. The game doesn't tell the player to do that. The goal to build a base is set by the player, not the game, and what a base even means in the game world is made up by the player. Is it playing and can it be fun? Definitely, but it's not gameplay, as in playing the game, it's a type of creative play, like building with Legos. When a person doesn't perform any actions, or when these actions are irrelevant, it's not gameplay, it's watching a movie with extra steps, like in Wuthering waves during story fights. These story fights have only one outcome, since the only objective is to reduce opponent's health to 0, while player's own doesn't even matter. This means that the fight is not interactive. There's just a player acting upon the game to complete the encounter and move the story forward. There is an interaction within a fight due to WuWa's combat mechanics, but once again it's irrelevant to the outcome. This devolves a fight into merely an interactive animation showcase, an illusion of gameplay, and it devolves player actions within a fight into flipping a page with extra steps. Perfect example of a story experience that is also gameplay would be in games like Undertale or Baldur's Gate 3, as player actions and chosen dialogue options can have a real effect on the course of the game. Despite WuWa's story being a beautiful, cinematic and literary experience, it is not a gameplay one. Gameplay in most gachas is located in their character progression, endgames and events, as well as world exploration in some cases. These game modes provide some measure of challenge, require some effort to complete, at least for new players, and provide rewards for their completion. For seasoned players, however, the amount of gameplay they provide is next to negligible. Events and exploration gameplay runs out as soon as limited in-game rewards do. The same goes for character progression and endgame, except their rewards, and thus whatever gameplay they have is refreshed daily and monthly respectively. Having in mind that gachas have next to no gameplay once the player is caught up with the content, how does one engage a gacha? My theory is, gachas aren't played, gachas are managed. Let me explain. Normal games like Hollow Knight or Megabong have systems that are designed to give player some kind of an experience. In Hollow Knight, a Metroidvania, players explore the world, fight bosses and piece together a story. The game's experience provides players with a feeling of an adventure and wonder at its mysteries. In Megabong, an action roguelike, players wander around a map, killing enemies, getting power-ups, and complete achievements for unlocks. This provides a simple fun of watching a number go up, both inside the run and in meta progression. Though these games are very different, their systems are meant to guide the player and give them a certain intended experience. In gacha products, things are seemingly backwards. It seems like the experiences, mainly story, art and events, exist to promote the system and keep people in it. And in order to stay in the system, people will manage whatever resources they get their hands on, which causes them habituation of ticking in-game checkboxes and sometimes even real money. What I think this means is, gachas are not video games. They are an episodic anime story promoting arbitrarily useful digital action figures powered by habituated time and resource management simulator and minigames in form of events, all in one product. This explains why so many measure the quality of a gacha by its revenue. It is, after all, the main and biggest focus of the gacha formula. Yes, devs don't work for free, and products are supposed to earn money, but you can see that every other genre is defined by the type of gameplay experience it provides. And yes, you heard me right. I dare say gacha is a genre, and not just a monetization practice. Aforementioned fundamentals of game design states: a video game genre is a specific category of games related by similar gameplay characteristics. Video game genres are not usually defined by the setting or story of the game or its medium of play, but by the way the player interacts with the game. Each gacha's design I know features nearly identical structures of story which promotes characters in some way, habituated character progression, events and endgame, which are 100% monetization driven. This monetization is so ingrained into all the systems that, in case of gachas, monetization becomes the genre. And now finally, I believe you are ready to get to the point. Wuthering waves and its unique identity. I know it's only anecdotal, but I myself started playing WuWa for combat. I loved the skill expression and moment-to-moment aspect of it. When I asked my friends, they also said their reasons were combat and world exploration, especially vertical movement. So, is WuWa just another typical money-bringing gacha, or a story-rich open-world action RPG with high degree of freedom? Kuro Games seems to believe the latter. Well, on Twitter they omit the action RPG part. What I mean to say is, every other gacha has a story, character progression, events, account check endgames, and some have overworld exploration as well. WuWa's combat is its unique defining feature, even among the non-gacha games that I know. It is what they should have focused on the most. Why then is it so neglected? I must confess, when I wrote first draft of this script, I was fine with putting all the blame for gameplay neglect on the story tourists, gacha resource managers, and character collectors. But after giving it some thought, I realized that would be wrong. Not because it would be rude or controversial, but simply incorrect. I have watched NoClip's 3-part documentary about Final Fantasy XIV multiple times at this point. And the key to the rebirth of the fiasco that was 1.0 was doing right by the people who stuck around with the game even in its hellish state. People enjoying WuWa in described ways are and always were a part of Kuro's audience and a part of their intended audience. They stuck throughout the less appealing early stages of the game and provided feedback, so Kuro could listen and WuWa could get as good as it is. Changing the game in a way which would exclude them now would simply be a betrayal on Kuro's part. That being said, those of us who want to engage in gameplay on a deeper level have also always been part of the core and intended audience, and the fact that WuWa's gameplay is being neglected remains. I assumed Kuro wanted first to improve underwhelming story and graphics from 1.0, thus making the presentation more appealing, and perhaps they'll focus on gameplay now, but after seeing 3.0 showcase I still had my doubts. Now, after 3.0 released, I have to say that my doubts were unfortunately confirmed. The new endgame does well at engaging more of players' roster, but it serves the same purpose as the two previous ones. Similar to TOA and WuWa, it is just a periodic account check, which players want to complete for Astrites, and its nuance is bound to expire very soon. These typical gacha endgame characteristics make it much less viable as a proper, long-lasting game mode. How can people play live service games, or even single-player ones, for thousands of hours? To answer that, let's talk about the evergreen games and their use of attractive, near-infinite gameplay loops. Gameplay loops are gameplay elements which players repeat the most. In most games this would be player encounters enemies to defeat, player engages in combat and defeats them, player gets rewards, repeat. Or player explores the map, player sees points of interest, player completes an encounter, player is rewarded, repeat. A game can have one, but usually has many intertwining gameplay loops of varying sizes, like WuWa having versions of both that I mentioned. They serve the purpose of spreading the feeling of progress throughout a longer period, so players' fun is rationed and lasts longer. For example, instead of choosing from the boss's rewards after defeating them, or getting all of the rewards, the boss drops loot randomly, incentivizing multiple clears of the encounter. Whether it's a good practice or not hinges on the item drop rates. Players should be incentivized to clear an encounter enough times to master it, thus exhausting the fun it could provide, but not so much that it stops being fun and becomes a boring chore. If you remember Theory about affirmable progress from earlier, you might realize an extremely clever trick good video games pull off. They promise material rewards for in-game progress, but put it behind a challenge requiring an ever-increasing level of cognitive improvement. Like, understanding of game mechanics in Megabonk allows player to choose items which synergize with each other, to gain enough power to complete harder runs for unlocks. Ever more difficult enemies or platforming areas in Hollow Knight guard items required for story progression. Therefore, the player needs to improve on their dexterity and combat instinct to pass the challenges. Raiding in MMOs promise items for clearing encounters requiring an ever-increasing level of cooperation and coordination with others, which facilitates social development, etc. Well-designed games use the promise of in-game progress in gameplay loops to trick players into cognitive progress, sometimes without them even realizing it. Obviously, not every loop needs to facilitate groundbreaking development. Many exist for players to just chill or affirm progress already achieved. However, the possibility for progress should always be there. If chilling is the only thing that a player can do, they will get bored eventually and go play something else. Increasing difficulty of the same loop also doubles as an affirmation of previous player and character progression. Players are getting accustomed to the mechanics of the game in a lower difficulty of the loop, so they perform better or at all at higher ones. The very ability to perform on higher difficulty itself becomes an affirmation of overcoming the lower one. This is largely absent from gacha games, in which character stats play the biggest role and player action is usually the far second. Wuthering waves is the biggest outlier I know in this context, as player skill does play a rather substantial role in combat, though the buff of the month still plays the biggest role. The only area in which this would be 100% the case is holograms, but once again, due to limited nature of the rewards, they are scarce in gameplay for a live service game. Increasing difficulty of the same loop also works in case of player character progression. In Terraria, in order to fight bosses, players need to find or craft an appropriate gear first. Rewards from bosses include even more gear, crafting ingredients, or unlocking new parts of the game. Then players explore, engage in new content, and procure stronger items to fight a stronger boss. The ability to engage in new content and characters' increased power affirms previous progress. You can see this progression pattern in many different games like Monster Hunter, Hades, or even Stardew Valley. Gachas are designed in stark contrast to this. Players pull for new characters, level them up and learn how to play them. They take them to the endgame and clear it? Good. Next reset or few come by, and now the endgame favors completely different characters, sometimes to the point that the previous ones might as well be useless. Gachas don't affirm player and character progression, but sweep it aside, usually for the purpose of monetization and new player accessibility. I think that is the very reason why Kuro wants to develop the rumored MMO. They must have realized the constraints the gacha model places upon the game design and want to try a new genre where gameplay isn't so tied to the monetization, thus giving much more creative flexibility. It will, however, be a good few years before we have Kuro product focused on good gameplay design, and so improving gameplay of WuWa is still worth discussing. Good video games are built like a mountain, or even a mountain range with different paths to reach the ever-growing peaks. In WuWa, however, all there is to do is complete recurring events for gacha currency. This endgame has to be accessible enough, otherwise the game is seen as predatory, but this also strips it from potential of any deeper gameplay. All these gacha characteristics turn the product from a potential mountain to a hill which plateaus way too quickly. Hopefully now you see how gacha's design contrasts that of most other video game genres, even live service ones. Altering WuWa to change all this would transform the game completely, possibly excluding less gameplay-oriented audiences. So I believe if WuWa's gameplay was to be improved, it would need to be contained in a separate, permanent, sophisticated game mode with different rewards than gacha pool currency. I do think, however, that creating such a mode would revitalize Wuthering waves for a lot of players and make it more valid as a video game. But Wuthering waves already has a big non-gameplay oriented audience. Can't they just survive on them without the players? Yes, but it means that WuWa's success is based on the increasing quality of new patch content and the hype around it. Should new patch be lackluster or just mediocre, the player satisfaction will suffer a lot. Let's take Path of Exile as an example. The most recent leak is considered very bad due to new mechanic being almost irrelevant for the endgame. Developers even nerfed loot by 30% across the game. Let's see how that went down. The peak on release is actually bigger than it was, but the fall is much faster. Please do note the steady line present before the peak. In PoE, major content is released on a 4-month-long cycle, so naturally the audience who joins for novelty will fall off during that period. But there is a percent of people who enjoy the loop for much longer. Going further back, we can see the persistence of this player base even through very long content droughts. Final Fantasy XIV is much more versatile game than PoE, with more varied activities, and its expansions are released every 2 to 2.5 years. The most recent expansion, Downtrail, was a downgrade to the previous Endwalker. They completely butchered the story for a lot of people, including me, and none of my friends were playing at the time anyway, so I myself stopped playing. Let's check how the game is doing now. Well, the game seems fine. Despite the decline, which is visible over 4 years, it's been going pretty okay. This time we can see the core player base, the non-tourists, even more prominently. They stay playing due to Final Fantasy XIV's variety of long-term gameplay loops and social aspects of the game. This is, I believe, the power of very good, long-lasting core gameplay loops. It incentivizes players to stay, regardless of new content's quality, since they know that the content which is already in the game is worth their time. It provides devs with a much-needed buffer for experimenting with new features and stories. It also gives players enough fun activities to play, even during content droughts. I don't mean to say Kuro does not experiment at all, but without a good core gameplay loop, they can't afford too many setbacks, which definitely slows WuWa's progress and skews new feature design towards more safe, tried and boring options. And I think we all remember recent combat event drought. This is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video. I believe that a good core gameplay loop in which players could progress regardless of patch releases may eliminate that issue entirely. Now I want to present to you a game mode which I believe could benefit players of Wuthering Waves while also avoiding any FOMO to those who don't want to engage with it. That being said, as Mark Rosewater once said, your audience is good at recognizing problems and bad at solving them. So to those of you who are uninterested, I wish to say goodbye right now. Have a nice day, play games and have fun. Bye. The issues I'd like to address in the game mode would be build variety, repeatability, itemization, difficulty scaling and goal chasing, and to do that I'll draw heavily from Path of Exile. The only problem with long gameplay loops is repetitiveness, and most games, including Path of Exile, keep the game fresh with variety. One could say PoE is more about the game mechanics than actually playing the game, to the point it's overwhelming. The important part of PoE's variety is that it exists in overlapping layers. The build variety is insane, so is the amount of item crafting methods, and endgame mode variety. All loot is random, which makes killing a monster or opening a chest like a mini gacha pool, of which there are millions. Even difficulty is customizable, and higher ones give better rewards, incentivizing players to improve on their build, skill and game knowledge. A player can target farm specific items by playing the game in a specific way, but there is a high amount of universal items that can just drop anywhere. This reduces FOMO, so players feel free to play the game the way they like. You can see how the multiplicative layers of variety make Path of Exile a game that one can sink in for thousands of hours. Obviously, not all of the combinations are a viable and fun way to play PoE, but even if you were to include that in the estimations, you'd still end up with a high enough number. Path of Exile is a perfect example for a permanent, repeatable and entertaining gameplay loop. Comparatively, Wuthering Waves severely lacks in build variety, as characters have at most few others they work with. This applies even more to echo sets, endgame mode variety, which admittedly isn't solvable with just one game mode, better itemization than a character having 3 to 4 useful substats that they want, which only add numbers to the stats, more difficulties and rewards scaling with them, and most importantly, repeatability, as time gating of rewards prevents Wuthering Waves from being played repeatedly, and chase goals. There is nothing to play the game for in the long term. New game mode could look similar to PoE's Sanctum or to WuWa's Fantasies of the Thousand Gateways. It could play in similar roguelike fashion, but instead of getting a power-up after an encounter, player would get a trade-off. Taking an example from PoE's difficulty modifiers, it could be something like enemies get plus 10% spectral def, drop rates increase by 10%. Drop rates of what? Do you remember Cube event and its itemization? In Cube event, you would randomly drop or buy different rarities of modules you'd slot into a cube to enhance its effect and or get plus flat to specific stats. What I propose instead would be something like this. First class of items would be bigger ones similar to Awakening modules, but instead they would alter or enhance the way the resonator works, as such. I believe that system like this would blow team and character building wide open and provide much needed refreshment for WuWa's gameplay. Since this would be confined in a separated game mode, it would not affect already existing balance of the game. And if you were concerned about devaluing newly released units and negatively affecting the gacha, because with this system you could substitute anyone for everyone, you don't have to. A character will always be better at what they are designed to do than a substitute. Additionally, you can take that argument and flip it on its head. If a character could be substituted for more characters, then pulling for a new character is like pulling for 5, 10 or even more characters at once. You would like Chisa to be main DPS rather than a support, inside this mode, you could build her that way. This means that you wouldn't feel bad pulling for characters that you like instead of pulling for ones that are better for your account, giving you more freedom to enjoy the game with the beloved characters of your choice. You could, for example, make pairings like Frolova plus Gian with Resonator deals havoc damage instead, Mortefi with coordinated attacks now inflict Spectrofrazzle plus Zani, or even Frolova with coordinated attacks now inflict Spectrofrazzle plus Zani with casting skills also counts as casting echo skills. And for single resonators with long rotations and slower animations like Zhengli Yao or Changli, you could equip once per second resonator gains up to X ghosts, which repeat its next action. This would enhance their gameplay, as you'd want to trigger this effect on certain hard-hitting moves for additional oomph. To juxtapose my items with existing ones. In a recent Honami event, we get these Namipons with additional effects for resonators. The problem is, they are extremely general and redundant. There aren't any enemies which would be a struggle with one setup and a cakewalk with another, so your choice doesn't really matter. It's a customization mechanic at this point. The character stickers are not much different. There is at least one Phoebus sticker which has a trade-off requiring some thought, but overall what they do specifically is inconsequential, as all of them can be boiled down to basically more DPS. Moreover, there is too much text on them, which makes their effects unnecessarily overwhelming and unintuitive. Things would be much different if they required a change in playstyle to activate and were necessary to complete the mode, but that's sadly not the case. Players can barely mentally engage, just press buttons without much thought and still be completely fine. Recall the times when you had certain stickers set up and the game automatically switched it for a one with irrelevant stats, just because it was higher rarity, and you didn't even notice until after. The complexity of these items is artificial, a mere mirror and smoke. I believe that my items, which work on already established principles of team building and have short, understandable effects, would be much better, well, provided that their effects would be substantial for gameplay. Should the mode be too easy, they too will become redundant. Proceeding with itemization. In addition to rarity, which would make these items drop with more powerful multipliers, they would also drop with a number of sockets, maybe 1, 2, 3. In these sockets, players would equip second class of items, which would give them stats, similar to Honami event stickers, but the stats would multiply with already existing ones. I want additional multipliers instead of flat bonuses, because I would like for players' own echoes to remain relevant inside this game mode. This way, the itemization isn't a departure from an existing progression system, but an additional layer on top, so the main character progression still matters. Otherwise, players may feel like the game doesn't respect the effort they already put in building their characters. Since we're talking about echoes, let's segue to what would people play this mode for? My answer is echoes and their upgrade material acquisition. Current way of obtaining echoes is very boring and time-gated. Since this mode could make use of a great number of echoes with more varied and better stats, we'd need much more of them. I would propose that during a run when a player kills enemies, they could drop their echo like in Nightmare Fields. The enemies, and thus echoes dropped, will be random, but when a player completes an encounter, one of the trade-offs at the end could be X set echoes are some % more common. These echoes take % less damage from Y attribute, for example, so that players can customize their run to drop certain echoes more often. Additionally, the bonuses to drop rates would apply to echoes as well, so the better players build their teams, the longer the run can last, thus providing players with more wanted echoes and upgrade materials. In order to address how much the trade-offs would affect a run, there could additionally be separate run difficulties, like different tiers of maps in Path of Exile. In PoE there are white, yellow and red maps. white are the easiest with lowest difficulty modifiers and reward scaling, and red are much harder with better rewards. This alone could make you think that acquiring specific echoes this way would be a huge hassle. Completing tasked fields is much easier and more efficient. And this is good for people who don't want to engage in this mode. I don't want to make this the premium way to earn echoes, just a more attractive and less time-gated one. The biggest flaw in this theoretical mode so far is there is much bigger effort to reward ratio, and once the team is built, that's it. There isn't a good enough reason to keep building teams after making one good team that works. I would like to solve these two issues at once. At the end of the run, depending on the run difficulty, a player will have a number of slots for echoes. They would choose which dropped echoes from the run to claim, and additionally they will have an option to sacrifice their items for a powerful drop multiplier. The rarer an item is, the higher drop multiplier coefficient it could provide. Entire highest rarity set could provide something like 30 times the drop multiplier. This would provide incentive for building teams with rarest equipment for best performance, and sacrificing said equipment for echo drops would incentivize building different teams with other items that players have left, thus enhancing variety and repeatability. To summarize, such a mode could offer resonator-enhancing items for build variety, reward scaling tied to customizable difficulty, and repeatability in form of big reward payouts with incentive to build different teams over time. Additionally, such a mode could double down as kind of beta testing. Developers could analyze what combinations people play to inform their future designs or balance of the main game. They could even add echo sets or effects exclusive to the mode before implementing them in the base game. To rehash again, Audience is good at recognizing problems and bad at solving them. So while I do believe this would be an awesome way to fix some of WuWa's gameplay issues, I may be completely wrong. I just want to be able to play a video game with awesome combat mechanics. Do you think WuWa needs such a game mode? Maybe you have an idea for a cool permanent game mode inspired from some other game. Are you indifferent? Is WuWa okay as it is? Or would you hate that such a mode even exists, even if it would be designed to not affect you? And that's finally all I wanted to share. Have a nice day, play games, and have fun. Bye.